Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you. We're going to kick off just slightly earlier because our Minister, Gordon Lyons, is taking some time out to come down specially to welcome everybody and to mark this event, which we really appreciate. But he has to get away straight after. So just before I invite the Minister to speak, I just want to say a couple of bits of housekeeping. Firstly, could you just put your phones onto silent, as I've just done, and just out of respect for the two speakers. Secondly, PRONI doesn't have any car parking at all, so if anybody is outside and parking, those are parking display spaces, and we would encourage people to pay the necessary amount, because it's never good when our audience get fined. Thirdly, toilets are out in the atrium. There's no planned fire alarm. In the event an alarm happens, please follow myself and other staff, and we congregate at the Ark Apartments on the other side of Queen's Road. And finally, this is one of many events that PRONI hosts over the course of the year. Details can be found on PRONI's website, and we also have a monthly e-zine called the PRONI Express, which you can all sign up to, and I would encourage you to. So just one last question. Is anybody here for the first time? Oh, that's great. Hopefully this will not be your last time, and you're all welcome. It's my pleasure to ask Minister Lyons to come and speak to us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephen. So my name is Gordon Lyons. I'm Minister for Communities, but in that role I am also keeper of the records. So in that role I'm very pleased to welcome you all here to this event today and to open it, which contributes to the wider international programme that commemorates Holocaust Memorial Day 2025. I am sorry that I'm going to have to leave after I speak. Unfortunately, we have an executive meeting at 1 o'clock that I need to log into remotely, and as much as I enjoy executive meetings, I would prefer to be here with you instead. But the reason for that is because during my time in office I have had the privilege to be able to attend a number of Holocaust Memorial events, and I have to say they've been some of the most poignant events that I have ever been part of. And I think it's absolutely right that we do take time to remember, to reflect, and here in Northern Ireland to think of the personal connections and stories that we have. And it's so important that we tell those stories and that we pass them down to future generations as well. Because, of course, the Holocaust was one of the worst atrocities in human history. And as we approach the 80th anniversary of the end of the Second World War and the liberation of Auschwitz, the largest Nazi concentration camps, it is a poignant reminder of the millions who lost their lives during the Holocaust. And it's also worthy to note that it's the 30th anniversary of the genocide in Bosnia also. And this year's theme is for a better future. And we all have a responsibility for ensuring that the crimes of genocide and persecution are a thing of the past. We want to embrace a future where people do not suffer prejudice or persecution because of their faith, their ethnicity, the colour of their skin, or their community background. And to do this, we need to continue to be vigilant and not forget the lessons of the past. And I'm absolutely delighted that today's presentation will feature two incredible speakers. The first is Csilla, who will share with you the story of Walter, who survived the Holocaust and made his way to Kilkeel. Our other speaker is Walter's sister, Esther, who will talk to us about how the family thrived in Northern Ireland, establishing a successful business, and how they made Kilkeel their home. And I think that Walter and Walter's family story is one of hope after unimaginable adversity. And it's so important that we continue to remember those individuals, families and communities, and do not let their experiences and their lives disappear from our memory. So I'm delighted that everyone will be able to hear from you both this afternoon, and thank you for ensuring that these stories of survival in the most difficult of circumstances are recalled and remembered. Finally, I would like to place on record my thanks to both the Public Record Office and the Northern Ireland War Memorial for marking Holocaust Memorial Day. I hope that is something that we never forget to do. I hope it's something that we will continue to do down through the years, because as time moves on, I think it's even more important that we don't forget the unimaginable horrors that took place during that time, and that we remember what happened, and we collectively work together to ensure that it can never happen again. Thank you very much.
My name is Walter Sekules. I was born on 20th of April 1940 in Tallinn, Estonia. My parents had moved to Estonia in 1938 after the Anschluss to get away from the German occupation. They lived there until 1941 when the Russians annexed Estonia, and they were interned as enemy agents. They first went to a camp near the Russian-European border, but as the Germans progressed, they were moved further and further inland, and the first camp, the only camp I remember, was in Kukuzek in Kazakhstan. We were in the Kazakhstan camp until December 1946. That's what 13 months after the war ended, when we were there, then released into the United Nations, I think, loaded onto trucks to go to Karaganda, the capital, and put on a train where there were sort of 4 families in each sort of goods wagon, with bunk beds in each corner for each family. The journey back took about 3 months, so it's a slow journey for 3,000 miles, but the train only went at about walking pace. Another thing, the great excitement was when we were about to approach the Volga. Now, I don't know whether the Volga is the border between Asia and Europe, but certainly everybody on the train was very excited about getting back into Europe. Mm-hmm. So we arrived in Vienna, I think the end of February 1947. Applied to move out of Austria to join the family in London. And my father's family had settled in Derry, and so really to get the documentation so we could go into United Kingdom. This we did in, I think it was early 1948. I remember these things because in Vienna I was in hospital with malaria, and when so I had my 7th birthday in hospital in Vienna, 8th birthday in hospital again with malaria in London. Things were never, as far as I could see, things were never bad, in that the family was always around, they always looked after me, and I didn't know any better. So the journeys and the looking out on the trains and so on were adventures for me, you know, new things. Arriving in Vienna was new things, seeing the cinemas, trams and so on. There's always an adventure. It's, you know, so to me it was never terrible. I mean, looking back, yes, they were difficult, but you know, I feel lucky.
Thank you. So my name is Csilla Toldy, and I met Walter Sekules about 6 years ago when I was commissioned to create a public artwork for Holocaust Memorial Day by the Executive Office of Northern Ireland, and I made a film poem, and part of my project was also to interview people who survived genocides, not only the Holocaust, but the other genocides that were committed in the 20th century. And in that year, the theme was standing together. So I asked each of my interviewees what helped them to survive. And in most cases, what I got was other people. So it was the goodness of people that helped them to survive. And the same thing I got from Walter. So he said that the family helped him to survive, but also the goodness of another nation that took them in, and they became enemy aliens. His story, his childhood story, was very inspiring for me, and I thought that after finishing that project, I thought that maybe we could work together and write a book about his early memories in the camp in Kazakhstan. He gave me a lot of information. He gave me his book, his mother's book that Edith Sekules wrote about surviving the Holocaust in exile in Siberia. And he also drew a map of the camp. Whatever he could remember, he wrote down, and he gave me that as the starting point for a book, which then I wrote with the help of the Arts Council of Northern Ireland, and also finally we were able to publish the book with the support of the National Lottery Heritage Fund last year. Unfortunately, sadly, Walter was not alive by then to see the book, but this was his last project. And just to say that what kind of person he was, so you could see him here in the film. He always had this twinkling eye and always interested in new things. I knew him, or got to know him, through my husband, who was teaching yoga to him and his wife, and they were in their 70s when they started doing yoga. So, and the other thing that I got from Walter, in his last email he sent to me, he said that could I recommend the Open University because he wants to learn creative writing himself. So he was always up for new things, always interested. And this spirit I was trying to convey and keep in this book. At the end, back of the book, you can see him on a swing. And his family told me that maybe this was the first time, not the first time, but at old age was when he started to play with these games. So he never had, for instance, a teddy bear, because in the camp he was playing with buttons. That was the only thing he could get as a toy. And it was nevertheless, it was, as he said here, it was a peaceful, lovely childhood. He made friends with a Russian soldier, and that's included in the book as well. And he also grew vegetables. He played in the yard. But things like, for instance, until the age of 7, he didn't see a tree because there were no trees in the camp. So it was a terrible, stark environment with our minds, if we look at it from this aspect. But nevertheless, he also always found something to do, make friendships. And just to illustrate the goodness of people and the trust that they needed to survive, I would like to just tell this story, which is the story of how they sent the first telegraph back to Northern Ireland. So when they were deported from Tallinn, they were refugees in Tallinn, and after that they were further and further moved into Siberia because the war progressed. They lost contact with their families. So the family in England and Northern Ireland didn't know that they were alive. They actually thought that they died, and they planted trees in their names in Israel. So the first time they could send some message about themselves was on the way back during that very long journey that Walter described here. And the first station was in Romania, where the train stopped. And as they didn't have any money all along, they only had one 5-pound note, which was basically a piece of paper printed by the Bank of England, and it was hidden in a coil of wool all along from Tallinn through Siberia and back on the way. So they took this little 5-pound note, which I actually checked. Now it would be worth 545 pounds. So it was worth a lot of money even at that time. So they took this piece of paper. Father took it and gave it to a stranger at the station. And he said, Mother put her fingers into a roll of wool and pulled out a white piece of paper. When she unrolled it, Walter saw that it was scribbled full of curly letters. We kept this pound note all these years, but now it has a purpose, Mother said. Father and Mother sat down to write a telegram for Father's relatives in Northern Ireland to let them know that they were alive and they were on their way back home. Father waved to a man standing on the platform. He took his hat off and came closer. Please take this telegram to the next post office and send it for us. The change is yours. The man looked at the 2 pieces of paper, then he nodded and smiled. Jawohl, he said. When another man on the train saw this, he asked Father, how can you trust a stranger with so much money? Father replied, we have no other choice. We have to trust. So this is the message that I got from Walter and the survivor. And I think this is, this year we have the theme, as the minister said, the theme of working for the future together. And I think in this sense, this book is still going to work. The other day I was talking to 400 young people in Nandrub College about his journey and his history. And I hope that it will live on for many years in the form of the book and also in the work of the family. And again, thank you for the Northern Ireland War Memorial Museum for organizing it. And thank you for listening to me.
Thank you for coming along today. It's lovely to see so many familiar faces. The Sekules family in Kilkeel Knitting Mills. Well, on the 8th of June 1916, my mother, Edith Mendel, was born to a vibrant Jewish culture of Vienna, where there were almost 200,000 Jews who contributed to every aspect of the European society. It was a diverse and sophisticated culture which would be obliterated in a very few short years by the Shoah of the Second World War. In Germany in 1933, the Nazi Party won the election and began the anti-Semitic campaign banning Aryan Jewish marriages and sterilization of certain categories of citizens. Jews started being sent to concentration camps, and in September 1935 in Germany, all Jews were deprived of their German citizenship, excluded from public life and many jobs such as teaching, farming, radio journalism, theatre and films. In Vienna, my mum had ambitions to be a professional pianist, but financial necessity sent her to study catering, commerce and languages, so she could contribute to the family finances. Her sister Lotte had to forgo dreams of being a professional photographer to go to commercial school. In the second year of studying, Mom was fortunate to get an unpaid position in the Hotel Bristol, where she picked up a lot of new skills. She eventually got full-time employment there, 6 days and a 60-hour week, with generous takeaway suppers. The hotel was like a small town. There she met many famous people who were guests and got some autographs. Musicians and composers like Shalyapin, Toscanini, Rachmaninoff and Yehudi Menuhin. On a day off, Mom was swimming with friends in the old Danube River. A young man was fishing from a boat, and Mom asked him, "What are you fishing for?" He replied, "Backfisch," which is German slang for teenagers. That young man was Kurt Sekules, a radio engineer, and he and Edith married in 1936. In 1937, the position of Jews in Germany was getting more perilous. Still, Mom would go to get standing tickets for the opera or 2 concerts a week. Her father commented that she was living as if the world was coming to an end. How prophetic that was. The Nazis, led by Hitler, triumphantly drove into Vienna to a tumultuous, enthusiastic welcome from the previously secret supporters. Next day, Mum turned up for work at the Hotel Bristol and was sent home with a note, "Dismissed, reason Jewish." She was 7 months pregnant with her first child, and it transpired that half the staff were members of what had been the illegal National Socialist Party. On the 18th of March 1938, the pogrom began. The Nazi press called it the Great Spring Cleaning. Jews were excluded from the professions, judges dismissed, and Jewish shops had to identify themselves. Jewish artists and conductors and directors were dismissed. 3 weeks later, prominent Jews were sent to Dachau concentration camp. My family lost all their income and had to let rooms to other Jews, sell the piano and other luxuries. Desperate for money, and with a new baby, Ruth, my mother decided to go to the Labour Court to claim redundancy pay. On the morning of the hearing in June 1938, the Gestapo arrived to take Mom to their headquarters for interrogation. She had been accused by her lovely former workmates of being a communist. Somehow, they eventually let her go. Maybe it was the 6-week-old child crying. My dad, Kurt, was able to rush to the Labour Court to hear the prosecution counsel declare, "The woman is probably on her way to Dachau by now." My gutsy mum was offered 50% out-of-court settlement. Not bad, considering the circumstances. To leave Austria, one had to queue for hours, if not days, at the relevant embassy, at the refugee agency, the Gestapo headquarters at the Hotel Metropole, for the necessary documents. In August 1938, Mum's sister Lotte was the first to leave the country for domestic work in England, escaping the hell that Vienna had become for Jews. They were stripped of all dignity, and the strength of hatefulness and collusion of the non-Jewish population was shocking. If you looked Jewish, you were made to scrub pavements or were arbitrarily sent to a concentration camp. Jewish shops had signs, "Don't buy from the Jew." Dad desperately sought work abroad, and it transpired that Estonia was the only country which admitted tourists without a visa. He received 2 cautious replies from radio factories in Estonia. So on 28th of September 1938, Edith, Kurt, and 4-month-old Ruth flew from Vienna with a little luggage and the 10 Deutschmarks they were allowed. Of course, even the baby was searched for hidden valuables. That same day, Neville Chamberlain left London for the 4-Power Peace Conference in Munich. One of the 5 stopovers was in Gdansk, where my future father-in-law, his brother, and mother were escaping on the last train. They got out by the skin of their teeth. Their Aunt Helena survived the Warsaw Ghetto. However, 16 other members of their family that we know of perished. Back to my escaping family. Worried relatives in Vienna telegraphed the rabbi in Tallinn. Woman and baby arriving helped to land. The result was that they were met when they landed in Tallinn. They were among the first refugees to arrive and were received as genuine tourists, allowed to stay for 3 months. Next day, Chamberlain made his infamous speech, "Peace in our time." My family's new Estonian friends found our wee family accommodation in the countryside away from the authorities. Dad gained employment at a small radio factory, and Mum did hand knitting for neighbours. Mum's mother, Marianne, flew to London in the spring of 1939 to work as a cook. Dad's brother, Robert, his wife and parents, left Vienna to set up a factory in Derry. They got visas through a government scheme to encourage new business. So there's nothing new in the world. Still in Vienna, Grandpa sent parcels to Estonia, including a dismantled pram. He used the money from the refund for the unused return plane tickets. Can you imagine that happening now? My big brother, Walter, was born in Estonia. The non-aggression pact between Hitler and Stalin was still in force, so my family were not regarded as enemy aliens. The non-aggression pact, in Vienna, Mum's grandmother died, and then also her 59-year-old father died of tuberculosis and probably malnutrition. Mum sent photographs of her growing family to her mother in London. This was to be the last communication until the war was over. Peace and tranquility were abruptly ended in June 1940 when the Soviets took over the Baltic states. They found themselves in the Soviet Union. Living space for each person was 9 square meters, and businesses were taken over by the state. My family listened secretly to the BBC, the only source of real news. They heard about the London air raids and worried about the fate of their family. In 1941, the so-called bourgeoisie who owned shops and businesses were rounded up and sent to Siberian camps. Mum managed to find her friend and give her some money and family photographs. June 1922, Hitler broke the non-aggression pact and attacked the Soviet Union. My family were now enemy aliens, as they had German passports. They realised later how fortunate they were to be arrested at home. They were instructed to pack what they needed for a year. Some people were allowed to bring what they could carry, and others were lifted in the street. They were loaded onto trains and were quickly moved east as the Germans advanced. They survived a direct hit on the train and then an 800-mile, 4-day journey in the heat and humidity to the Oranki camp in Gorky, which is, I think, called now Nizhny Novgorod. In November, another move of 800 miles to the Kazakh city of Akhtubinsk. The transport was train cattle wagons with wooden bunks and a hole in the floor as a toilet. Mum recalled that as she lay on her bunk, she could touch the heads of 11 people on 2 bunks. Daytime temperatures would fall to minus 20 degrees centigrade and night times minus 30. The diet in the camps consisted of tasteless gruel of watery soup made of oats and millet and a chunk of black bread, occasionally a piece of salted fish. Everything was eaten with a wooden spoon and bowl, which did nothing to improve the taste. At 20 months old, Walter got suspected scarlet fever and was sent to an isolation hospital. There he also contracted chickenpox. By the time he returned to the camp, he was like a weak, skinny newborn. Mum asked the camp commandant for help, and he gave her extra rations of noodles and semolina to try and feed him up. And then, now don't try this at home, but a Polish orderly suggested a blood transfusion. He took blood from my mother's arm and injected it into Walter's buttock 10 times at 2-day intervals. As Csilla said, he only left us last year, aged 82. Men worked in the brick factory and women on the farm, so the Viennese city girl learnt to lead a horse and plough to make furrows for potatoes. July brought another 1,000-mile, 4-day train journey, destination Karaganda in Kazakhstan up in the mountains. At the Spass camp, Mum set Walter on a bunk, and he was soon covered in bites. It was infested with hungry bed bugs, which were paper-thin and transparent before they attacked. Dad accidentally stepped on a rusty nail, which resulted in thrombosis. This ended up as a blessing, because many men died from heavy work and insufficient food. The only medication available was sodium permanganate crystals. The population of the camp at this time was 1,300 people from 17 nationalities. It transpired that women and men from poor countries were better at surviving the basic diet. Many Scandinavian men used to rich food died quickly. The prisoners received news of the Battle of Stalingrad and the bravery of the Soviet people at the siege of Leningrad. They had no inkling of the Holocaust or the slaughter of the Jews in September in Warsaw. A Viennese dentist extracted a painful wisdom tooth for Mother with neither painkiller nor anaesthetic. The room was freezing, but both patient and dentist were perspiring and exhausted by the end. In 1943, they were marched to a new camp at Kokusek. All the buildings were completely covered in snow. Spring 1944 brought food parcels from the USA, which caused great excitement and improvement in morale. They contained cooking oil, egg powder, fish powder, and preserves, etc. February 1945, Mom gave birth to her third child, Leah. I said to her, I thought the men and women were separated in the camp. And she replied, the nights were long and dark, and we were young. Mum struggled, as Csilla said, Mum smuggled a letter out of the camp to her mother in London, care of the Jewish Refugee Committee. Granny Mariana had already planted trees in their memory in Israel. In 1946, the camp regimen remained the same, but there was more bartering going on. Tobacco and paper for making cigarettes remained a key scarce currency. Anyone who had a newspaper or a book could sell it in cigarette-sized bits for a good profit. One man who owned a copy of Gone with the Wind hit the jackpot. The Soviets entered the war against Japan in 1945, and in spring 46, Japanese prisoners had arrived in the camp, and they bartered silk and wool blend underwear for bread. From January till March 1947, the 63-day journey that Walter referred to in cattle wagons from Kokusek to Vienna. They were told to steal as much coal as possible to ensure heat for the journey. They travelled through Ukraine, Romania, and Hungary. At a stop in Romania, my parents composed a telegram to Dad's family in Derry. All the years, Mum had hidden a white British £5 note in a ball of wool. She entrusted the message and the money to a complete stranger on the train platform. He sent the message that the little Sekules family were on their way back to Vienna. Miracles do happen. When the train stopped in a small Hungarian town, local Jews came out to give a welcome. They couldn't believe that the prisoners of war from Russia still had children. Theirs had been murdered by the Nazis. When the Soviet troops had told the prisoners about the Nazi atrocities and extermination camps, the prisoners did not believe that such horrific things could happen. They thought it was Soviet propaganda. Now they heard it firsthand. My family arrived in Vienna on the 29th of March 1947, back to the city they had fled 8.5 years before. No money, no home, but all full of hope that one day having a normal life. Ruth was now 9, Walter 7, and Leah 2. All refugees were living in classrooms. They received a visit from the secretary of a long-standing friend, Bernhard Altmann. He was offering them the use of an apartment fully stocked with food. The children were excited by their first experience of a bathroom. Imagine that. Mum was impressed by the miraculous effect of Persil on her clothes. Food and clothing parcels arrived from family in London and New York. The children got malaria, tonsillitis, and Leah got TB. Mum eventually met the former director of the Hotel Bristol, who gave her the other half of her severance pay, and this gave them the cash to travel to the UK. September 1947, they travelled to London after gaining visas organised by Dad's brother Robert, who had settled in Derry. This was 9 years after they first left Vienna. In Derry, Dad's mother, Oma Elsa, taught piano and took in lodgers. Dad's sister Stella and her 2 children disappeared during the war. Robert, Dad's brother, had a factory making artificial flowers. Now, Dad and his brother did not get on. Nothing changes. So Mum got a job in a toy factory, earning £3 a week, making teddy bears and dress dolls. And when workers' playtime would come on the radio, everyone would get up and dance. Mum used her Siberian experience to grow vegetables, to start in her own garden, to help reduce the shopping bill. Soon after travelling to Northern Ireland, Mum gave her first talk in her schoolgirl English, and she continued to give talks to women's institutes and church groups throughout her life. In 1949, they became desperate about extending their work permits, which would be refused because Dad was unemployed. Mum's mother, Oma Mariana, came to the rescue. As they say, in life, the darkest night turns into the brightest dawn. One day, during their lowest period, a neighbour fetched Mum to take a call from London. It was their old family friend, Bernhard Altmann, who said, in hearing their plight, "Would you consider starting a knitting factory?" And Mum replied, if you think it's something I could do, I'll give it a go. His confidence in her ability opened the way to a new life for the Sekules family. The plan was that Mum would go to the machine manufacturers in Leicester and study how to work the equipment. Mum had to report to the police before going to England for a 2-week training course. Her only expertise was with 2 knitting needles. She had become an expert in the camp in 1946. She knitted 30 items for the family with the ripped out yarn from the wool silk underwear, which the aforementioned Japanese prisoners of war had supplied for food. Slowly but surely, Mum learnt to master the machine, and highly motivated because she wanted to deserve the confidence he was showing in her. She returned home with her first pair of Argyle socks. Travelling home, Mum felt nervous and felt intimidated by the authorities and people in uniform, stemming from her experiences of the Gestapo and the KGB. She only stopped feeling this terror of not being able to get back to her family after they were granted British citizenship after living for 5 years in the UK. Bernard arranged for 2 machines to be delivered to Derry with payment when she could afford it. They were fixed to a table in their bedroom, and Dad became her first pupil. and Granny Elsa handgrafted the toes together. A real family business was born. In 1949, clothing was still rationed, but hand knitting wool did not require coupons. Mum bought light grey and oatmeal yarn for the background and many bright colours for the patterns. Soon they were producing a dozen pairs each week and advised to charge 10 shillings, that's 50p, for a pair. She went to the best outfitters in Derry to offer the product. First customer was Geeves, the Navy outfitters. Delighted to see the first fashion items since pre-war years. 2 other stores bought from her as well. Bernard, on hearing the results, said, "You're never going to get too far using the machines yourself. You need premises and staff." She contacted the Department for New Industries of the Ministry of Commerce, who gave her a list of 6 towns potentially interested in the new types of employment for women. Her longest trip by train and bus was to Kilkeel, where they eventually started the factory. They started recruitment drive and training program. 12 machines arrived and 2 additional girls started working each week. Dad was the trainer and added new processes like feeding elastic into the top ribs. New girls were trained in the evenings. Some were as young as 14 and learnt quickly. Mum learnt new things like opening a bank account, writing a cheque, keeping books, preparing wages and dealing with purchase tax, finding suppliers, and most importantly, finding customers. From making argyle socks, they introduced hose tops for bands and then bespoke kilt hose to match kilt tartans. Soon they supplied these all over the world, wherever there were pipe bands or dancing schools, and this was Dad's side of the business. When hand knitting machines became popular, Mum created many designs to keep her home knitters busy. Later she discovered the popularity of Aran knitting among the population, and for many years they had regular large orders from the US companies Saks Fifth Avenue and Brooks Brothers. In spite of long working hours, my parents enjoyed the local bridge club, tennis, and Mum the WI drama group. In 1954, a wee late surprise arrived. Me. I was the only one born in peacetime. Later, I worked for 13 years in Kilkeel Knitting Mills, and later Walter took over. The business was continued until dear Walter passed away in 2023. Kilkeel Knitting Mills Ulster Sock Company over the years employed hundreds of women from across the community. Mum was only asked once, "Are you a Protestant Jew or a Catholic Jew?" By the way, she worked for many designers, including Paul Costello, and Princess Diana wore one of his designs made by us. Mum, Walter, and his wife Moira were very involved in the Friends of Bourne Grange community for special needs adults, and that's the adult version of Glencraig in Hollywood. Bourne Grange is where Walter's celebration of life was held. In conclusion, my parents were always positive and never showed any bitterness after their wartime experiences. They survived when many others didn't. Thank you.